All right, let's just jump right in. Picture this. You're suddenly handed the keys to the most powerful country on the planet, right in the middle of the biggest war in human history. And the real kicker? You've been kept in the dark about all the biggest secrets. I mean, that's not a movie plot. That was the actual reality for Harry S. Truman.
Just try to wrap your head around that kind of pressure. He's not even president for 4 months, and bam! The fate of the entire world, how to end a catastrophic war, and the start of a terrifying new era, it all just lands right in his lap. Unbelievable.
So, you gotta ask, how did he even end up in this position? Well, it all goes back to April 12, 1945. The country is in shock, mourning the death of FDR, and just like that, Vice President Truman is catapulted from the sidelines right into the heart of the chaos. And Truman's situation was, well, it was totally unprecedented. He wasn't just the new guy, he was an outsider who had been purposefully kept out of the loop by FDR's inner circle. He didn't know about some of the most critical wartime secrets, so he's basically learning on the job, but the stakes are literally the future of humanity.
And the list of problems waiting for him, it was just overwhelming. I mean, look at this. The war in Europe is finally winding down, but the entire continent is just a pile of rubble. Over in the Pacific, Japan is refusing to surrender, digging in for a fight to the death. Military planners are telling him an invasion will be a bloodbath, costing maybe hundreds of thousands of American lives. And then there's the big one, the top-secret ace up America's sleeve that Truman himself had just found out about, the atomic bomb.
And that secret weapon brings us right to his very first, and you could argue his most significant, trial by fire. The atomic decision. You know, the question they were wrestling with was just brutal. Every single day the war dragged on, thousands more people were dying. They knew an invasion of Japan would be an absolute nightmare, a bloodbath for everyone involved. And then there's this new weapon, a truly terrible option, but one that could potentially end it all in an instant. And this really lays out the impossible calculus he was facing. On the one hand, you have the argument that using the bomb would end the war, like, right now. It would save countless American and Japanese lives that would be lost in a ground invasion. But on the other hand, my gosh, the unimaginable cost in civilian lives. Plus, there were real questions then and now about whether Japan was already on the verge of surrendering anyway.
And the final cost is just, it's staggering. This is where the abstract strategic debate becomes horrifyingly real. We're talking about more than 100,000 civilians gone in the blink of an eye.
So that one single decision had this incredible two-sided effect, right? It slammed the door shut on World War II, the deadliest war we've ever seen. But in the same breath, it kicked open the door to something entirely new and in some ways even scarier, the nuclear age, and the long, tense Cold War with the Soviet Union.
You'd think ending a world war would earn you a break, right? Nope. For Truman, the trials were really just getting started. Now he had to figure out how to rebuild a broken world and deal with the rising threat of Soviet communism. He wasn't just a president anymore. He had to become the architect of a completely new world order. And he did it systematically, building this new strategy on 4 main pillars. First up, the Truman Doctrine. That was basically a promise. If you're a free nation resisting a communist takeover, America's got your back. Next, the Marshall Plan. This was brilliant, pouring billions of dollars into rebuilding Europe, figuring correctly that a strong economy is the best firewall against communism. Then came the big test, the Berlin airlift, an unbelievable feat to supply a whole city by air. And finally, he locked it all in place by creating NATO, the military alliance that defined the West. I mean, this stuff became the bedrock of American foreign policy for the next 4 decades.
But here's what's so fascinating. While all this is happening on the world stage, Truman is also fighting another war, a completely different kind of war, for a different kind of freedom, right here in the United States. Okay, so let's look at the war abroad first. In 1950, North Korea invades South Korea, and Truman doesn't hesitate. He sends in U.S. troops. It turns into this brutal, grinding conflict that becomes a stalemate, especially after China jumps in. And this is where he makes maybe his most controversial decision ever. He fires General Douglas MacArthur, a national hero, for insubordination. People were furious, but Truman stood his ground, defending one of the most important principles of American democracy, civilian control over the military. And at the same time that war is raging, he's fighting this other battle at home, a fight for the very soul of the country. This is huge. He makes the incredibly brave and politically dangerous move to desegregate the entire U.S. military with the stroke of a pen.
He's pushing his fair deal to protect workers. He becomes the first president to ever speak at an NAACP event, and he's out there demanding federal anti-lynching laws. For that time period, these actions were absolutely radical. He was laying the foundation for the civil rights movement that would explode a decade later.
So you step back and look at all this. These massive, world-changing decisions, these huge contradictions. How do you even begin to sum it all up? Well, let's try to unpack his very complicated legacy.
First, you absolutely have to look at the criticisms, and they are serious. The debate over the morality of using the atomic bombs, it's as intense today as it ever was. His whole containment strategy, while maybe necessary, also locked the world into a tense, 40-year global standoff. The Korean War was incredibly costly and ended in a draw, and his loyalty programs, which were meant to root out spies, ended up creating a climate of fear that helped fuel the witch hunts of the McCarthy era.
But then, look at this. It's fascinating. When Truman left the White House, he was one of the most unpopular presidents ever. His approval rating was barely 30%. But fast forward to today, historians consistently rank him in the top tier of American presidents. It seems like time and perspective have really changed how we view the impossible choices he had to make. And maybe, just maybe, it all comes back to this one simple phrase he famously had on his desk. It perfectly captures his entire philosophy. This wasn't a guy who passed the blame. He understood that ultimately, the responsibility was his and his alone. He made the hard calls, and he never ran from the consequences. When you boil it all down, Harry Truman's presidency shaped the modern world. His decisions, dropping the bomb, containing the Soviets, pushing for civil rights, their shockwaves created the world we all grew up in. So the final question isn't just about whether his choices were right or wrong. The question we have to ask ourselves is, if we were in his shoes, facing those same impossible trials, would we have had the guts to make a decision at all?